Welcome to Beyond the Ballot AZ. I'm your host, Tom Collins, Executive Director of Arizona Citizens Clean Elections Commission.
And I'm Gina Roberts, Voter Education Director for Clean Elections.
Today we're talking about direct democracy in Arizona. And what that means is when voters get a chance, whether it's through initiatives or referendums, or even in some cases recall, to have a direct say in what is happening in terms of state law.
That's right, Tom. And just real quick for our listeners, an initiative is when voters themselves are circulating petitions to put something on the ballot. A referendum is when our legislature is referring something to the ballot, or when our voters are referring something that our legislature approved and they're putting it back on the ballot for the people to vote. And then a recall is when voters, again, circulated petitions and they're trying to recall an elected official from office.
We're here with Dr. Tom Riley from Arizona State University and the Center for an Independent and a Sustainable Democracy. Dr. Riley, thanks for coming back to Beyond the Ballot AZ.
Thanks for having me.
So today we wanted to get into ballot measures. Coming up here this fall, voters in the state are going to have some ballot measures. 2 years ago, they had a ton of them. Your perception of this, are voters using ballot initiatives more often now, either here or around the country, and what's happening with that?
In Arizona, there's been an increase, mainly because we allow the legislatively referred initiatives. So in addition to citizens, the legislature can refer. And because we have a divided government, right now with a Republican legislature and a Democratic governor that's vetoing their legislation, they just need a simple majority to get it on the ballot.
Are there particular topics that gain traction in that polarized environment? Are those topics that where the electorate is less polarized than the representatives? How does that kind of play out?
Well, it's interesting because, many scholars and researchers have, and of course, James Madison, in his Federalist number 10, was very concerned about direct democracy tools, very concerned about the tyranny of the majority. In fact, many scholars have suggested that these direct democracy tools worldwide and in the United States have been used for more conservative type of initiatives, that it favors more the populist. Of course, I've challenged that a little bit, and I used Arizona as a state. And in Arizona, it's kind of been broadly defined for both liberals and conservatives to advance certain issues. But if we look over the last 10 years and we look at the issues of initiatives, those initiatives that have been popping up more frequently have been expansion of Medicaid, has been preserving abortion rights, and increasing minimum wage, where referendums have been more centered around the issues of taxes and revenue. So those are the type that most recently have been popping up, which tend to be a little more progressive measures, which kind of underscores my point is that direct democracy tools have kind of used by everybody. Arizona is rich in direct democracy since we've had it since 1910 in many respects. And we've used it to curb affirmative action. We have one of the most progressive minimum wage policies. We have a redistricting commission that was done by voters. So we've kind of covered the whole spectrum politically.
Right. No, that's true. And of course, I'd be neglectful to say that almost all the major campaign finance reform measures in the state, including the Clean Elections Act, the Voters' Right to Know Act, have been passed by voters through the initiative process. You touched on this with respect to James Madison. How are political parties then responding to the use of either ballot measures from voters or, in Arizona, legislative ballot referrals?
I think generally, and this is probably an overstatement, both parties don't like direct democracy, right? There might be one party that's kind of leading the charge, but then the other party is a little silent as legislation moves through. So they're maybe not as vocal because they don't want to appear to be anti-democratic, right? Or to not support initiatives that are widely supported by the public. But generally, there's a disdain for these type of initiatives, no question. Now, what complicates the issue in Arizona is that we not only have a citizens or voter initiative, which requires a certain number of signatures 4 months in advance. They have to be valid signatures collected, very expensive process to go through. There is also a mechanism of legislatively referred. And in 2024, and we'll see in 2026, we've seen a proliferation of these legislatively referred initiatives. And it's not that they just began existing. It's because we have divided government, right? And so in this case, we have a Republican-led legislature that is passing legislation that is being vetoed at record pace by a Democratic governor. So what they're doing as a workaround is that they're putting these legislative initiatives on the ballot. And the reason they can do that, it requires a simple majority. They do not need governor approval to get it on the ballot. Well, there's kind of two questions. One is there wide support for citizens initiatives? Yes. Legislative initiatives? Probably. But if we gauge in the last election, most of those legislative voter initiatives failed. Historically, legislative initiatives actually edge out citizens initiative passage in Arizona. Not the case in the last, several years, but overall. So I think that as we have more initiatives appear, is there voter fatigue in looking at initiatives? That clearly is happening in California. I do think we're seeing some of that in Arizona.
You mentioned cost with respect to the citizens initiatives, and you mentioned efforts in states, including Arizona, to restrict, procedurally, put hurdles to that. I mean, over time, when does that really start to curb the ability of citizens initiatives to be successful if the barriers to entry become too high?
I think that's the key because where legislators have not been able to kind of thwart the will of the public in wanting these, they have control of the process, right? And so what they're doing is making it increasingly difficult to discard ballot, to challenge them. It's interesting. In Arizona, there's been several attempts, and there hasn't been much success in voters agreeing to any of these changes. In Arizona, there's been an increase, mainly because we allow the legislatively referred initiative. So in addition to citizens, the legislature can refer. And because we have a divided government right now with a Republican legislature and a Democratic governor that's vetoing their legislation, they just need a simple majority to get it on the ballot. Nationally, there's kind of a consistent trend in the number of ballots that are appearing, which about 2/3 that are passing. The voters' initiatives, the trend seems to be more progressive issues like expansion of Medicaid, minimum wage, and protection of abortion rights. Referendums have been centered more around taxation. And I bring that up there because, the thought is that perhaps there's been more direct democracy tools used for conservative versus more progressive. And I see that, one, nationally, that trend seems to be changing. And clearly in Arizona, the direct democracy has been used by both Republicans and Democrats.
Thanks for listening to Beyond the Ballot AZ. I'm Gina Roberts.
And I'm Tom Collins. We'll see you next week.